Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome Mustek back to What's Next. We are going to be talking to JP Gough, who's the head of software and cloud at Mustek, and we are very honored and privileged to talk to Darren Williams, who's the CEO and founder of BlackFog, and he's joining us all the way from California. So thank you for joining us and getting up so early, Darren. Firstly, welcome to you, and JP, nice to see you. How are you gentlemen doing this morning?
Doing well. Thank you very much, Aki. Thanks for having us on.
Good. Nice of you to join us. So let me start off by just talking about this particular product, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it because I've heard a little bit about BlackFog. And Darren, I mean, despite the cybersecurity market being worth 173 billion. It's astonishing how massive this market has got, but we still are seeing many attacks, especially over the last 18 months, especially since we've had this pandemic hit us globally. South Africa has been no exception, and recently in South Africa we've had issues at Transnet, we've had breaches at the Department of Justice. How are these organizations still getting caught out by cyber criminals in 2021?
Well, I think it's a reflection of some of the technology that exists today, frankly. I think the criminals are getting more intelligent, and I think they're really focused on looking at holes in the security system. And clearly, obviously, the technology that exists today is not adequate to stop them. I think it reflects the growing trend and use of artificial intelligence for training and what we're seeing out in the marketplace. And you're right on the numbers. I mean, we're collecting a lot of statistics as well. But what we're seeing is that, existing technologies like antivirus software and those traditional fingerprinting technologies where you're effectively taking the fingerprint of the guy after he's already got in and stolen your jewels are not really effective anymore because, back in the 80s, it was a great technique. You basically take the fingerprints of the guys that are getting in, but when there's a few thousand, it's okay. But when you've actually got, literally tens of millions of variants these days, like explosive virus growth, effectively, like with COVID, it's the same problem in that you can't effectively scan. And what's happening is these cyber criminals are getting so smart now in that they're actually doing polymorphic code injection. So effectively what we're talking about there is instead they're basically wearing gloves. So effectively it regenerates its own signature every time it deploys itself, so that there's no way you can use a fingerprinting database to compare the active virus with what's on your machine, because effectively it's changed. So those technologies are not there. And then when you add on artificial intelligence, what's happening is that the traditional software is actually used in their training engines. And so effectively they're getting all these cybersecurity tools, putting it in their training engines and seeing which code segments actually works. And so with that, there's finding all these security holes and just training the engines accordingly. So that's when we sort of thought about the problem a little bit differently and thought, well, look, if you've got an artillery out the front of the building with all the snipers and you've got big locks on your doors, you would think that would be a great way to protect yourself. But actually what happens is the criminals aren't stupid. They're not going to go into straight in front of Napoleon's army and get killed. They're going to go around it and they're going to flank them. They're going to come in, they're going to tunnel into the building. So that's when we thought, well, why don't we just assume that they're going to get in? And then from there, what we're going to do is block them on going out. So when they've got the jewels in their hands, walking out the building, we'll get them and trap them at that point. And that's sort of the essence of what we talk about with BlackFog. And that's sort of how it works, really. And we call that anti-data exfiltration, or ADX is what we call it.
Well, I love the analogy that you've just used, and I just understood it instantly as you explained that they can grab the jewels, but they can't get out.
Exactly, like a mousetrap, effectively. Yeah,
it's absolutely brilliant and ingenious if you think about it. I mean, you have to outsmart these cyber criminals, and the fact is that we touched on South Africa, but in fact globally, the situation is pretty bad. It's not just South Africa, it's just globally, but I think that we are being targeted a little bit more than other countries. Now, POPIA, for example, the new regulation that's come into play, this has highlighted the need for South African businesses to protect customer and client data. At the end of the day, it's all about the data. Why is this important, Darren? And how are South African businesses faring in protecting their own data?
Yeah, well, I think POPIA Act is amazingly a great move forward from the government to actually protect people's data. I mean, we've seen this effectively since the beginning in Europe with GDPR and really other regulations all over the world. I mean, every day we're seeing new regulations, even in the United States. And we think that's an important step. I mean, it always has to start with regulation, and then it comes with enforcement, and then basically companies, once they start getting fined and there's some penalties associated with it, then companies start adapting really quickly, and then they adopt appropriate technologies. You're really right in terms of the statistics are amazing in terms of, I think South Africa is actually, per capita, is actually affected, is one of the top countries in the world. Why is that? And we sort of think about that a lot. You know, the United States is obviously one of the highest, but one of the reasons we think that South Africa is targeted a lot is you guys sort of leapfrogged a couple of technologies where the rest of the, you know, some of the more developed countries like the United States and Europe, we effectively went from, you know, the desktop computing to laptop computing to mobile device computing. And then we did all the financial transactions with Apple Pay and Google Pay, etc. You guys were sort of already there because you sort of skipped a little bit. You went sort of from the desktop right through to mobile because you skipped that whole desktop intermediate thing. And you guys were really very quick to adopt these financial transactions, and we call them microtransactions. So you guys have a lot more at stake because you were already sort of where we are today in America. You were already there a few years ago. So that means that there's actually a lot more, there's a lot more, a bigger target on your back because, of course, all your financial transactions are on your mobile devices now. So that's a fantastic thing for a criminal because they go, okay, you've got all your financial transactions there, let's go and attack them. So I think this POPIA Act, to go back to that, is really important to help protect the consumer. I think it's early days still in terms of the enforcement. I know the Act has been actually, you know, is in place, but I don't know that anyone's been fined yet from a government perspective. But I think what you'll see is that very quickly, once the government starts putting some teeth behind it, you'll see that companies will start adopting these technologies and get out from under the whole antivirus is enough, because I think, you know, that's what people seem to think. And obviously we know 80% of the time now, antivirus doesn't actually work. So yeah. I think that's a pretty inevitable. So I think it's going to be great. And I think it's just a catch up is what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, look, we've seen a massive, you know, transformation happening over the last 12 months where many organizations are doing all their compliance that they need to do to be POPIA compliant. But I think you're quite right. I see once you have a few big fines and government, you know, starts slapping a couple of people around for you know, having the data infringement, I think people are going to get a big fright. And you know, we've seen this happen abroad. Darren, when you look at BlackFog, and I love the analogy that you used earlier, that a new way of thinking is required in terms of preventing data breaches and maintaining data privacy. Why are the old ways of thinking no longer sufficient? And I guess you touched on it a little bit earlier, but if you can go a little bit deeper, because I guess that the criminals have figured out how to break in with the old ways, right? And they've become a lot more sophisticated. I just couldn't believe how sophisticated these criminals have become the way you described it earlier.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that. So, you know, we described a little bit of how the product works, and we, as we said, we call it data exfiltration. Basically, all we mean there is really watching the data leave the device, because everybody's watching the data coming in, because it's pretty logical if you think about it. You know, if an attack is coming towards you, you're going to go stop, 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 stop. So all of the technologies that exist, you know, 6,000 cybersecurity vendors in the world today, and effectively 5,999 do exactly the same thing. they stop the attackers coming at you. Now, there were some technologies in the, I guess, in the early 2000s called DLP, data loss prevention, and it tried to sort of do a little bit of what we did, but it actually sat on the edge of the network. So like a firewall sits on the edge of the network, it stops data leaving that way. But the trouble is that with everybody actually working remotely with hybrid workforces and all these sorts of things these days, we're finding that it doesn't really work having equipment sit on the edge of the network. It's very hard to maintain. You've got to classify data, all sorts of problems. So we thought, why don't we use that whole data loss idea and put it on the endpoint? So one thing we never talked about is that BlackFog sits on your device and all the logic sits on the device, and there is no traffic leaving the device. We're just watching it. So we're packet filtering effectively, and then we're watching all the data leave, and then we run over that and some artificial intelligence, some behavioral analysis, if you will, and effectively we're watching like 27 to 30 parameters. And what we're doing is saying, okay, is this a bad guy or is this not a bad guy? If there is data leaving your device, what's it doing? Okay, it's attempting to actually inject itself into this process. Hey, that's not a normal thing to do. Why don't we actually have a look at that in a little bit more detail? Oh, it's actually trying to go to Russia. Probably a bad guy, right? So if you wrap together 30 of those types of parameters and techniques, then we're able to detect really accurately what is good and what is bad, and we're able to stop it. So we sort of call it a preventative technology. And that's sort of how we think about, how BlackFog actually works. And it seems to be pretty effective. In fact, we use it a lot for privacy, data compliance as well. So there are lots of different ways of using this technology. I would like to point out that we also say we don't expect you to delete and remove any current security products. In fact, we designed our product to sit alongside the current technologies because we believe you have to have a lock on your door. We believe you have to have that defensive approach, but you also need to look at what's going out the back door too. So we sort of work hand in hand with the technologies that exist as well. So I guess that's a pretty good summary. I hope that answered your question.
No, absolutely. I'm just fascinated by it and the intelligence that you have built in. So it picks up anything that's kind of suspicious, saying, well, we're not usually doing this. Why is this file going there? Or why is that happening?
Exactly.
I mean, BlackFog focuses on preventing data exfiltration, as you mentioned, to provide that superior protection against attackers. Could you explain what data exfiltration is and how BlackFog protects against it?
Right. So the data exfiltration, or ADX, we call it anti-data exfiltration, is, we're stopping data leaving the device only when we determine that it's actually bad. So effectively, these could be lots of different scenarios. So insider threats is a great example. So basically, you've got a rogue employee. So we basically would tell that you, for instance, have a disgruntled employee. You're about to leave. What is the typical thing an employee does in this situation? They will try and download the entire Salesforce database and all their contacts, and they'll try and extract a lot of information from the company before they leave. We will raise a flag and we will say, clearly this guy's up to no good. He's doing something that's very uncharacteristic of his behavioral patterns in the past based on his baseline, and therefore we will be able to detect that. And so we're able to look at a lot of different things that you traditionally can't really look at. And then the other aspect to remember is that a lot of people don't think they're safe. They've got all these cybersecurity tools. They think, oh, we can't possibly get attacked. We've got the best of breed solutions in our business. And all of a sudden they find that they're attacked because, as we've seen with SolarWinds attack, the Kaseya attack, there's these cyber criminals are sitting on the endpoint and waiting to attack, and they remain latent. We call that dwell time, where they're effectively sitting on the endpoint of your device for months, 6 months for SolarWinds as an example. And then one day they wake up and then they go, okay, let's launch an attack. And what do? Well, they have to communicate with an external server, usually in Russia, China, Iran, or something like that. And then we're able to detect as soon as they wake up, we're able to go bang, and we put the gates up and say, hey, this is not normal. What is going on here? And then we stop the attack from happening. And the other thing that they tend to do is they do lateral movement within an organization. So say they're on your device, the first thing they want to do is move across the entire network and traverse your entire system. And so as soon as they do that, that requires exfiltration as well. And we're able to, again, put the gates down, stop the transfer, and spread within the organization. So lots of different ways of thinking about data exfiltration, and it actually applies to way more than you think. Even simple data loss, industrial espionage, all those sorts of things we're able to actually look at as well.
So it sits on the actual device, right?
Correct.
Could that device be a tablet, for example, a phone, or a PC?
Yeah.
Is it any kind of device?
Any kind of device. And that's a really important point to remember, that most technologies that exist, even some of the really, really large vendors these days, they all actually do the same thing, and they talk to their cloud service. So when you're running even an AV solution, typically they're downloading all their signature databases, but every time they're doing an analysis, they send data back out of the building and to go and analyze it in this cloud service. Well, we figure that okay, there's an invasion of privacy there for number one. And the other thing is they're actually monitoring every single thing that's running on your machine and telling central control, which is the AV vendor. And so effectively you're basically just pushing the responsibility from your machine being private. Now somebody else knows about what's going on. So we're all about saying, look, we don't want to tell our servers what you guys are doing. That's your business, but we will stop the attack from happening and we'll stop the transfer. So there's some sort of responsibility I think we have here as a vendor to say, look, we don't really want to spy on you. And this sort of goes into questions about how VPNs work as well. So VPNs do a secure channel between you and another entity and then do the connection to the final destination. We also are able to monitor that too. So some people say, oh, well, we'll just use a VPN to provide security for our org. Well, it doesn't really. You're just offloading what you're doing and all your clicks to another provider. Well, what happens if that provider gets attacked, which we've seen 3 or 4 times now? So again, now you have to worry about not only your data, but what are your third parties doing with all the data they have on you? So there's a few aspects where exfiltration is involved where people, until you think about it, you just don't consider that.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. JP, I want to bring you into the conversation now. Mustek is debuting its software and cloud business unit with you at the helm. Congratulations. And how will this new unit benefit Mustek resellers?
Thank you, Aki. I really appreciate the opportunity. So it's quite an exciting challenge, but I think more than anything else, it's quite important to remember Mustek's indirect business model that we've always had a lot of success with. It's brought the business a lot of success in the past 34 years, and we've got an exceptionally strong customer base that is growing month to month, year on year. And when we look at new business units or we look at new products and solutions, when we add them to our portfolio, it normally provides a great opportunity for our partners, especially from a commercial perspective, to grow in their services that they're offering into the market, right? So, firstly, I think that's one of the key benefits, and then one of the other benefits is during all of our years of growth, we've really become a large business with edge to infrastructure all under one roof, and this creates a lot of convenience for all of our partners.
Fantastic. JP, I just want to ask you just to move into the light a little bit, because I'm just picking up. Yeah.
Let me see if I can do that.
No, that's
got a bit of a westward sun coming.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Just as it is like that. Because you for a moment you look like one of these cyber criminals talking the ransomware
in the shadows,
like the dodgy look, So, JP, why have you decided to bring on BlackFog as part of this new business unit? I mean, just talking to Darren about it, I think it's a coup, and I think it's absolutely brilliant that you've got BlackFog on board. I mean, BlackFog obviously brings a lot of reliance and uniqueness to the table, right?
Absolutely, Aki, you're absolutely spot on, and I laughed so much. I tried to have a little chuckle by myself during the Napoleon analogy, and it was exactly that, right? So you've got 5,999 vendors out there doing exactly the same thing. When you see something unique, it's worth placing a bet on. And I think the innovation and the uniqueness behind BlackFog as an entity and an organization is really the key factor that really attracted me to this brand, and obviously the business to this brand. So and nowadays I think we would be quite ignorant to say that all of us are not being affected by some sort of a data security compliance or some sort of a privacy compliance, whether you're doing online banking or whether you are borrowing your device to a family member to quickly do something on your device. We are all suffering from the same things that only IT pros used to suffer from. So, the uniqueness of this product and just the relevance in the market is really what grabbed my attention.
No, fantastic. Well, look, Darren, I know the answer to your question because I have worked with Mustek, and I know Mustek for over 2 decades. They have a stellar reputation in South Africa, and they're one of the most recognizable brands in the country. So I can understand why you decided to sign this distribution agreement with Mustek. That's my perspective as an independent journalist, but why did you sign up with Mustek?
Well, like you said, it's obviously a preeminent brand, obviously, in South Africa. But one of the things we really look at when we look at partnerships is obviously market presence, which they obviously have in spades, but also a partner that actually gets it, frankly. And not everybody gets this approach, because one of the things about cybersecurity professionals is they don't like to be challenged with their current belief structure. So if they've always thought attackers work in a certain way, they don't tend to like to adapt. And so when we look at partners, we want to make sure that they really understand the value of what we're doing and that we have a new technique. And JP and the Mustek team immediately got that. And so it's like, oh, finally, somebody who actually understands what we're talking about here. And they said, yes, we clearly need a new technique. And you guys provide a new technique. How does it differ? And they ask a lot of really cool questions. And when we've got an engagement with a company like Mustek that asks really intelligent questions, they get it right away. And it's like, oh, man, these are the right guys. So that was one of the big things. So, market presence and the business side obviously is important, but just having a vendor that understands what you provide and recognizes your value means you're going to be successful. If you've got someone that says, oh, we'll give it a shot and we'll see how it goes, that's a completely different discussion. It's like, yeah, well, you don't sound excited. You don't seem like you think it's going to work. It's probably an uphill battle for us. So Mustek was obviously really looking for something, and we sort of came at the right time, and some great professional executives as well. And, it's just a pleasure doing business with them. So, I think we've got the right partner, and, that's why we chose them.
Well, listen, that's great to hear. I mean, I know the CTO, Dimitri Tsirpis, at Mustek, and I remember him telling me about BlackFog a few weeks back. And I mean, he's like, he takes security very seriously and looking after the networks. And when he started talking about BlackFog, his eyes lit up, So I just knew that this product is pretty unique in what it does. JP and Darren, I mean, what can the market expect from this partnership, both in terms of your go-to-market strategy and in the future? What are you planning to do with BlackFog in South Africa?
I'll let JP start with it, and I'll maybe pile on.
Yeah, so Aki, I think apart from all the obvious jargon around it about growing the market and getting this product in everywhere, I think for us a very large portion to this is really enabling our managed security service providers in our supply chain to fill some of these gaps, right? To go and close that back door for the jewels, for the thieves. to really complement their tool sets that they are currently utilizing as a managed service provider, providing services into the market. And I think this is really one of the key strategies for us, is to really focus around growing that partnership base and filling those gaps in the tool sets.
Fantastic. And from your perspective, Darren?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that was really attractive to Mustek was actually their access to the MSSP market. And that's an important part of it, because one of the things that we saw in the marketplace very early on was a lot of the tools that exist today, they're really focused on high-end enterprises. And the trouble is, a lot of them require 5 to 10 technical staff in your IT department to actually run these systems. So we designed BlackFog to be very simple to run with one guy, and so that you could have all the protection the big guys have, but with one guy. And so that was an important aspect. So if you think about the MSSP market, it's perfectly designed for that market, where you could go as a small company, small business, and there's mainly small businesses in the world, they can't afford the high-end tools. That's not fair, because they're just as affected as everybody else. So we thought, well, why don't we develop a tool that's easy for these guys to actually offer as a service, just for 5, 10 people or 100, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then they can provide it to the end users in those companies for a very good, cost-effective solution. So we expect that we should be able to protect our mums and dads equally as well as big enterprise businesses. So we're able to cover that gamut, and Mustek has access to that market. So it made a lot of sense for us to partner, yet just another great reason of why we partnered.
Fantastic. Now, I recognize the accent is Australian, even though you're in the east coast of the USA. Does BlackFog prevent Australian rugby teams from scoring points against the Springboks?
Unfortunately not. No, it does not. No, so the Springboks are pretty darn good. So, yes, it is Australian originally. And so whilst I'm actually originally from Melbourne, so I'm not into the rugby as much. I'm into Aussie rules football. So that's more of a Sydney thing. But no, I appreciate the skills that involved in the rugby. And obviously we saw it covered significantly when I was a kid. But no, it's very hard to beat you guys, I will say.
Well, listen, you taught us a few lessons just recently, but we're not going to go into that. I'm still in therapy about that. But Darren Williams, CEO and founder of BlackFog, and also JP Gough, who is the head of software and cloud at Mustek. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you both about BlackFog. I'm looking forward to seeing those results and hearing more about BlackFog as it infiltrates the South African and African market. Thank you for your time, and wishing you well, and enjoy your day further in California.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks. Pleasure.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.